the lack of knowledge and education among the medical professional community that is probably the #1 barrier to the widespread use and adoption of fertility awareness-based methods. And it's as simple as the fact that these methods and the science underlying how fertility awareness-based methods works are not regularly taught in medical schools, nursing schools, other health professional training programs, as well as residency education. So there is a glaring absence in terms of the educational content offered on fertility awareness-based methods. There was a study back in 2010, in fact, that showed only 3 to 6% of OB-GYNs and family physicians had correct knowledge and understanding of some of the more common modern FABMs. If doctors don't know about these methods, how can they offer them to their patients? When you ask medical professionals what methods they are familiar with, the #1 method they say they're most familiar with is the calendar rhythm method. This actually comes from another research project that Facts did. We actually surveyed the directors of women's health and family medicine residency programs throughout the Northeast. And let me just show you, hopefully you'll be able to see here with my arrow. We look at this dark blue when it comes to not familiar. As you can see, the overwhelming majority of medical professionals who are responsible for training future physicians about women's health care, the majority were not at all familiar or had limited familiarity with Creighton, Family of the Americas, 2-Day, and Marquette. Some percentage had some knowledge of symptothermal, but again, the method they were most familiar with reportedly was the rhythm method. It begs the question, then why do the majority of medical professionals today still think of the rhythm method when it comes to women and couples that use natural or fertility awareness-based methods? Why are they not familiar with modern fertility awareness-based methods, which frankly, they may not be so modern anymore because again, the Billings ovulation method and the symptothermal methods were really developed in the 60s, followed by the Creighton method in the 70s. So I mean, these methods are now 30, 40, 50 years old, and yet most medical professionals are not familiar with them. And I'd like to say it's really due to a number of reasons. First is marketing. Marketing takes a lot of money. I know this because my younger sister is in marketing and she does an amazing job and makes a ton of money marketing makeup. But marketing takes a lot of money. And the reality is when couples use a natural or fertility awareness-based method, while there is some upfront costs, and it is really important to invest that money in learning a method from a trained instructor, you're not getting a prescription filled once a month, for decades. You're not having a device inserted, via a physician, a medical procedure that could cost, a few $100 to $1,000. So there's marketing that needs to be done, but there's very little money to be made when it comes to using fertility awareness-based methods. So there's not, in turn, a lot of marketing done. The other thing is that the birth control industry is, in fact, a very profitable industry. In the United States alone, research shows that it's more than a $4 billion industry. And part of that is due to the fact that birth control now is not merely prescribed only for family planning purposes, but it's prescribed to quote unquote treat a variety of other conditions. When in reality, in many instances, while it may temporarily address and minimize or reduce the symptoms, it oftentimes doesn't get at the root underlying cause. So, but it's challenging in the fertility awareness world because there's so little money that's being made, whereas in the birth control world, there is so much money that is being made to heavily market that. So medical professionals may not learn about it from that regard. And the other thing is misinformation. Most medical professionals do not truly have a solid understanding of the science that underlies fertility awareness-based methods and how these methods work. And that's critical. In medicine, we are constantly striving to look at the evidence. Is this an evidence-based approach? What is the science supporting it? The reality is we need research to show that. Again, there's not a ton of money to be made in fertility awareness-based methods, so there's not been a lot of funding dedicated to researching these methods, and as a result, there's limited information and or a great deal of misinformation out there about these methods. Probably the #1 source of misinformation has to do with the effectiveness rates. Unfortunately, up until just about a year or so ago, the CDC often only quoted a single failure rate for all fertility awareness-based methods. Specifically, they said that these methods fail 24% of the time. Well, in fact, that is incorrect. It is not true that fertility awareness-based methods fail 24% of the time. This quote, this commonly quoted rate, reflects a combination of mostly outdated methods. It was based on the national surveys for family growth that were done in the late 90s and the early 2000s. In these surveys, they asked women if they were pregnant and what form of family planning they were using. And then they basically took any woman who reported she was using any natural method and lumped them all into one category. And then what they did is they looked at what methods did women most commonly report, and they found that 86% said that they were using some form of rhythm or calendar type calculation. They were not using modern fertility awareness-based methods. When you actually look at the effectiveness rates for the individual methods, the real unintended pregnancy rate varies and can be as low as 2% per year, which many women who use fertility awareness-based methods understand and realize, but the overwhelming majority of medical professionals do not understand that important fact. The other thing, and this is a reality, women actually do not need their doctors to be able to use fertility awareness-based methods, right? I mean, if a woman wants to take the pill, at this point, she still needs to get a prescription from her doctor. If she wants to have an IUD placed, she needs to see her physician. Women and couples that want to use fertility awareness-based methods can learn to use them from trained instructors and do not need to talk about it with their medical professional at all. You know, in many ways, as medical professionals, we're a little bit superfluous when it comes to the use of fertility awareness-based methods, but we do play a very important role. And this is why it's so important for us as physicians to know how these methods work and to be able to support patients. And when I talk with my colleagues in medicine, I often use the example of breastfeeding. You know, breastfeeding is something that is natural and it's healthy. Many people have a perception that it's easy because it is natural, but the reality is that many women struggle when it comes to breastfeeding. And as a physician, I really need to do my best to educate my patient and to support her use of it. But if she's really struggling with the latch or with the positioning of the baby, I am not going to be the one to spend the time necessarily sitting there and working with her. This is when I'm going to work with my allied health professional colleagues like lactation consultants and call them in, because they're really the experts when it comes to educating and teaching women how to breastfeed their baby. Again, it's a natural thing, but some women are going to need more support than others. Another example that I give my medical colleagues is when you're learning how to use a fertility awareness-based method, realistically, a woman could use fertility awareness-based methods for 40 years. I mean, she can begin learning to chart her cycle as a teenager, and she can really use it up through menopause because these methods are safe and effective, and they have no risks in the perimenopausal period like hormonal contraception does. So this is a behavioral skill that women can learn to use over the course of their lifetime. And the good news is the tide is beginning to change when it comes to research in fertility awareness-based methods. A couple of years ago, I conducted a thorough review of the literature that has been published on fertility awareness-based methods. There was actually a study that was published in 2010 that looked at the literature. Wow. And what it showed was that, you know, the overwhelming majority of physicians and nurses receive very limited education in natural methods, and many of them would not mention natural family planning as a viable option for women. The recent articles also found is there still is a lack of education and inadequate knowledge about these methods, and less than 10% of physicians have accurate knowledge about the effectiveness of the FABMs. So at least there's more research being focused on the education of medical professionals with regards to FABMs, but what it shows us is we still have a great deal of work to do. But there is reason for hope. One of the things one study found is that physicians and nurses both agreed that the single most important factor for providing this education, at least within a medical environment, is to have nurses specifically trained in a method. Dr. Peter Donnie, who's a Creighton-trained medical consultant, and did a study of medical students' knowledge, and he found that even a brief educational intervention can increase medical students' knowledge and comfort with counseling patients on these methods. And then another study looking at an online elective that Facts has offered showed that whether students took our elective in person or online, they significantly increased their knowledge of fertility awareness-based methods. So a current study that we recently completed is we looked at what is taught in medical schools with regards to reproductive health in general. And as you can see, almost half of the topics mentioned in reproductive coursework at medical schools pertains to family planning methods. But when you break that down, what you see is the bulk of that actually discusses hormonal birth control and long-acting reversible contraceptives. Fertility awareness-based methods is actually mentioned only about 3 to 4% of the time. So if you wonder why only 1 to 3% of women use fertility awareness-based methods, perhaps it's because less than 4% of medical professionals are actually exposed to this information in medical schools. This is a real gap, and it's an area that needs to be addressed. And this may explain why your doctor doesn't have a clue or looks at you funny when you mention, I use the symptothermal method. Another research study that we did is we wanted to look at what's taught in residency programs. And what we found in a survey where we had about responses from nearly 150 family medicine residency programs, nearly 2/3 said that they do not have any faculty that are formally trained in fertility awareness-based methods. Only 14% said yes, they did. So again, the overwhelming majority of residency programs where medical students are learning to become physicians do not have faculty trained in fertility awareness-based methods. Now, the good news is that many of these programs would still be willing to accommodate residents who were willing to counsel patients on all options, even if they only plan to offer fertility awareness-based methods to patients. So there is a good news there. So again, there is reason for hope. And at Facts, we are really seeking to change even further the culture of medicine so medical professionals can really truly understand the normal healthy reproductive cycle and how fertility is designed to function.